Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Imagine a creature that doesn't die, no one can kill, and thrives on misery and despair. A creature that can't be reasoned with, can't be bribed, and whose presence alone makes human beings relive their worst moments. Alright, now imagine thousands of them. Not a great situation to deal with, right? But unfortunately, this is precisely what the Wizarding world, specifically the Ministry of Magic, had to deal with after the fall of Voldemort. For many years, the Ministry put Dementors to work. In fact, their arrangement with these creatures dates back to 1718, when the newly elected Minister for Magic, Damocles Rowell, took office. Rowell saw the Dementors not as a threat to be eliminated, but as an asset, something he could exploit to guard Azkaban and keep prisoners in line. Since the prison needed watchmen, Rowell reasoned that using non-beings like Dementors would spare the lives of Wizarding guards. And while at first the Wizarding community protested the idea of employing such foul creatures, that attitude soon shifted when the breakout rate at Azkaban dropped to virtually zero. Slowly but surely, the objections faded, and people came to accept the system. Dementors became the perfect guards for Azkaban, ensuring that no prisoner would ever escape. But this arrangement wasn't one-sided, as in exchange the Dementors wanted just one thing: free reign to feed on the emotions of the prisoners within its walls. And when the Ministry effectively handed them a captive population of prisoners, it created a system where everyone seemed to benefit, except the souls being drained. And this raised some serious ethical considerations. Was it truly justice to condemn someone not only to imprisonment, but to a slow, inevitable decay of the mind and spirit, to have every happy memory stripped away until nothing remained but emptiness and despair? For the Ministry, the trade-off seemed worth it. The Dementors got to feed, the public felt safer, and even the darkest witches and wizards now had a reason to think twice before breaking Wizarding law. Facing a Dementor was a fate worse than death itself, and the Ministry knew it. And while the Ministry may have justified all of this as a necessary evil, it blurred the line between justice and cruelty, and for a long time, this arrangement worked well. However, the big problem with Dementors is that they'll provide their services to the highest bidder, whoever can provide them with the most souls. And when the Second Wizarding War reached its climax at the height of Voldemort's second rise to power, he had effectively overthrown the Ministry and recruited Dementors for his own cause. The rest of us sleep less soundly in our beds, Cornelius, knowing that you've put Lord Voldemort's most dangerous supporters in the care of creatures who will join him the instant he asks them, said Dumbledore. They will not remain loyal to you, Fudge. Voldemort can offer them much more scope for their powers and their pleasures than you can. With the Dementors behind him and his old supporters returned to him, you will be hard-pressed to stop him regaining the sort of power he had 13 years ago. And while the good guys were able to eventually defeat Voldemort and begin to regain control of the Wizarding world, restoring order wasn't so easy. By this point, the Dementors had gone against the partnership they had maintained with the Ministry since 1718, and instead pledged their services to Voldemort. Basically, they could no longer be trusted, and this left the Ministry with the monumental task of deciding what to do with an entire population of Dementors. After Voldemort's defeat, Kingsley Shacklebolt was the first man to step up and serve as the new Minister for Magic. Kingsley was a unique minister in that he was actually a good person, and this meant that, whether the Dementors had faltered in their loyalty or not, it's unlikely that he would have continued using their services at Azkaban. To him, the very idea of employing creatures that fed on human misery was incompatible with a just and fair Wizarding society. And so one of his earliest and most significant reforms was to end the Ministry's reliance on Dementors altogether. Rather than keeping them on as prison guards, Kingsley had them driven out of Azkaban, finally breaking the centuries-old arrangement that had begun under Damocles Rowell. From that point on, human auras and wardens were assigned to maintain order, bolstered by defensive enchantments strong enough to keep even the darkest prisoners contained. HarryPotter.com reinforces this. Under Kingsley Shacklebolt, Azkaban was purged of Dementors. While it remains in use as a prison, the guards are now auras, who are regularly rotated from the mainland. There has been no breakout since this new system was introduced. But this reform raised another issue. If the Dementors were no longer allowed to surround Azkaban, where would they go? Azkaban was really the perfect place to keep them. Not only did it solve the issues of ensuring that prisoners stayed within its walls, but it also kept the Dementors far away from the wizarding mainland. Azkaban was located far out in the middle of the ocean, and it served as a naturally isolated fortress that prevented them from roaming freely among the general population. It was also their birthplace. The dark wizard Acristus, who lived during the 15th century, was the first to make use of the island. A practitioner of the darkest kinds of magic, Acristus built a fortress there and conducted horrific experiments, often luring Muggle sailors to their deaths. And it was from his dark magic the Dementors first gathered, drawn to the pain and suffering that emanated from the island. When Acristus eventually died, the stronghold remained, haunted and saturated with such dark energy that Dementors continued to thrive there, even without him. By the time the Ministry officially converted the fortress into a prison in the 18th century, the Dementors had already made Azkaban their home. The Ministry's deal with them wasn't about bringing them in, it was about taking advantage of the fact that they were already there, in numbers too great and with power too dangerous to eradicate. But once Kingsley made the decision to cut ties with them, that containment was lost, and all of a sudden the wizarding world was faced with the prospect of an entire population of Dementors with no prison to anchor them. Without Azkaban's walls to bind their feeding, they could go anywhere, drifting toward places steeped in human suffering, multiplying in times of conflict, and spreading despair far beyond what the Ministry could directly control. And this brings up a larger, more unsettling truth about Dementors. They cannot actually be destroyed. J.K. Rowling herself explained, "You cannot destroy Dementors, though you can limit their numbers if you eradicate the conditions in which they multiply, i.e. despair and degradation. This means that no spell, potion, or curse can wipe them out. They are classified by the Ministry as non-beings, not truly alive, but not truly dead either, amortal. They exist as raw magical presences born from suffering itself. There are even competing theories as to how Dementors reproduce. Some suggest they grow like a fungus under conditions of despair, hopelessness, and darkness, multiplying in environments steeped in misery. Others argue they literally breed, with Cornelius Fudge once warning in Half-Blood Prince that Dementors were breeding, their unchecked spread causing unnatural mist to choke the skies. Regardless of which is true, the outcome is the same. The more darkness and suffering in the world, the more Dementors appear. And though the Patronus charm is the only known defense against them, it doesn't actually kill or even harm them, it merely drives them away. And with Kingsley kicking them out of Azkaban, one of the greatest post-war questions was, what happened to the Dementors? The truth is, we don't have any definitive answers. J.K. Rowling never tells us exactly what became of the Dementors after Kingsley's reform, nor does any Wizarding World resource. What we do know, however, is that Dementors can't simply be destroyed or wished away. Fortunately, I've got a couple of theories for what may have happened to them. First of all, I think that it's highly unreasonable to assume that the Ministry would allow thousands of dangerous, unkillable creatures to freely wreak havoc across the Wizarding World, especially a Ministry led by someone reasonable like Shacklebolt. Therefore, I suspect that the Ministry likely relocated them to a remote, desolate part of the world, an uninhabited island or wasteland where their presence would pose less of a threat. My best guess would be another small remote island, something similar to Azkaban in its isolation, but without the constant flow of prisoners. An unmarked landmass far from shipping routes, perhaps cloaked in enchantments to ward off both muggles and wizards alike. A place like this would allow the Ministry to keep the Dementors out of sight and out of mind, while also preventing them from wandering freely across the mainland. Of course, this wouldn't be a perfect solution, as it's very possible that the Dementors would still be feeding, multiplying, and growing stronger in the shadows. But from the Ministry's perspective, relocating them to some forgotten rock in the middle of the sea may have simply been the path of least resistance. Dementors simply aren't conquerable. They can't truly be destroyed, and imprisoning them in any traditional sense is impossible. The best anyone can hope for is to keep them concentrated in one place, somewhere they can at least be tracked, monitored, and contained. The only real tool the Ministry has that they can use on Dementors is the Patronus charm. A Patronus is a good defense against Dementors because it produces a positive energy force that represents everything that Dementors aren't. The Patronus represents hope, happiness, survival, and purity. And as the Patronus does not feel despair or hopelessness as a human might, the Dementors can't hurt it and are repelled by its presence. If all of the Dementors were concentrated in a single location, it really isn't hard to imagine the Ministry using Patronus magic as a kind of barrier, warding them in and preventing them from ever leaving the island. Of course, this would require a lot of manpower, and I don't suppose too many people would raise their hand for the job of guarding a small island full of thousands of Dementors. But this is where the Patronus Charm's brilliance really shines through. You see, there are two types of Patronus Charms, an incorporeal one, like we see most Hogwarts students manage in their training, and a corporeal one, which takes on a distinct animal form and has far greater strength. Casting an incorporeal Patronus is certainly a good method of keeping Dementors at bay, but its real drawback is that you actually need to be in the presence of the Dementor to cast the spell and ward them off. A corporeal Patronus, on the other hand, acts as a true guardian, an animal spirit that can move independently of the witch or wizard who cast it. And this is where its real brilliance lies. These Patronuses can be stationed at a distance, meaning they could guard the perimeter of a Dementor island without the constant physical presence of the witch or wizards themselves. It wouldn't make the Dementors disappear, but it could keep them penned in, and the bonus here is that no real witch or wizards would have to be put in harm's way. And while there's no way to confirm it, it's not hard to imagine that confining the Dementors to an island without a real food source could, over time, cause their numbers to dwindle. We know that they can't die in the traditional sense, but without a steady supply of despair to feed on, they might weaken, scatter, or even fade into something less dangerous over time. If Dementors really are generated by misery, degradation, and hopelessness, then depriving them of these things may serve as a strategy to starve them out, cut off the despair, and their numbers dwindle. And it's not so much killing them as it is eroding the conditions of their existence. Anyway, that's about all I've got for theories today. What do you guys think? You tell me. How did the Ministry get rid of the Dementors after the war? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light.